Hello, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us today. I'd like to welcome you to the Teaching Movement Disciplines in a Time of Disruption webinar with our special guest, Professor Tim Pino, who's the VP for Strategic Initiatives at Colorado Mesa University. My name is Pam Martin, and I'm part of the Customer Success team here at D2L, and I look forward to being your host today. Before we jump into things, I'd like to take care of a few housekeeping items and make sure everyone has the best experience possible. At the bottom of the screen, you'll find an option for Q&A. Clicking Q&A will bring up a window you can use to submit a question. We have a team of people online today that will be helping to answer the questions, and we'll do our best to answer all of the questions during today's session, but depending on volume and timing, we may need to follow up with some after, and we'll show you where you can find those answers. An on-demand version of this webcast will be available in the next 24 hours, and the link of the recording will be emailed to you. We invite you and welcome you to share this with colleagues that you think might benefit from this session. With that, I'm going to turn this session over here to our special guest, Tim. Here we go.
Good morning or good afternoon, everyone, or possibly good evening, depending on where you are. My name's Tim Pino. You can see some of my background there. Most of my life has been spent teaching movement disciplines until I went over to the dark side of administration. And so I have about 30 years in a college classroom teaching movement disciplines, acting. I was a dancer. Martial artist for more than 25, 30 years. But then over the last few years, I became a director of distance education at Colorado Mesa University. So I have one foot in both worlds. So as the current disruption hit us, I thought that it might be helpful to all of you to see how you might be able to do some of this online from somebody who has a foot in both worlds. I will tell you that as we go along, I've made a sort of natural break about every 2 or 3 slides here so that we have time to answer some questions in the middle of it. So that's me, and we'll get, if you don't mind, we will get right into the big picture, which is first and foremost, and you probably have all figured this out at this point, the reality is it's simply not going to be the same. And you sort of have to start with that paradigm as an artist. And we are used to doing that as artists. We are used to hearing, we only have 3 hours to rehearse this, or we only have $50 for costumes, or we don't have a potting wheel, or whatever it may be. And as artists, we all work within those bounds, and that's when we come up with our greatest art most of the time. So you have to start yourself from that position. It's not going to be the same as teaching in class. You're not going to be able to accomplish the same things. And so then you have to sort of switch that mind thinking to, what can I get done in this way? And so you also have to learn that the student learning will simply be slower. For those of you who teach in the movement disciplines, you're used to being able to physically manipulate a student to get them into the position that you need them in. Even if you're not touching them, we'll stand there and we'll say, well, pretend I'm pulling on this hip, or pretend this, or pretend that. And because you're in physical proximity to the student, you can accomplish that more quickly. Because most of our students are kinesthetic learners, they are going to have a harder time processing information when it only comes to them through video, so sight and sound. So that doesn't mean they can't learn, but it means there's an extra block to their learning because they're not learning kinesthetically. I know that when I was a dancer in dance class, when the instructor was talking through things or was demonstrating the next techniques, I was automatically moving my body somewhat to get them into my body. That's how I learned. That's not as easy in this environment. So that's going to slow things down and create some roadblocks. Just be aware that that exists. So if you go to the next slide, additional considerations in terms of when is it necessary to work with a partner and when can it be individual. I like to use the martial arts paradigm of think of individual work as a kata. In the martial arts, the kata or form is almost always done with multiple imaginary partners. So if you've ever seen Tai Chi, people doing Tai Chi. Historically in China, in its true form, that's done with 4 imaginary partners attacking, and those movements are responses. So as much as you can, you want to be able to allow the student to think of individual work as partner work with an imaginary partner, much like in acting when we talk about monologues and there being an imaginary other that you're talking to. If you do need to do partner work, then I think your best option is you have to assume that you're going to use untrained people. And there's we'll show you a clip of a video at the end of this that I've done, a short video of how I teach these things online. I actually used my daughter, who has never been trained in any of this, to help me in that video. So you have to plan for the fact that the partner isn't going to have the same set of skills. Last additional consideration is safety is harder to assure. So for me, I always insist on incredibly slow motion until I give them the permission to speed up. And I actually will go so far as to say that I will dock them points on things if they're not going slowly enough. That happens to be the thing that I see most often, whether it's a dance class or whether it's a stage combat class or a martial arts class. All of those people want to go fast, quickly. And we all know as good kinesthetic teachers that we actually learn faster kinetically by doing it slowly, because we have to engage more fine muscle groups when we do it. So in essence, you're going to have to explain to them that doing it slowly is going to help them in the long run. And then last part is you have to really break movements down into small units. The video you'll see longer, if it was done at full speed in real life, would be about 2 seconds of actual movement. But it took me about 7 minutes to teach it the first time. So assume that you're going to have to, I had a person tell me that what I'm really talking about is chunking the information. And I went so far as to say, no, I'm actually talking about nibbling the information in terms of when you present this to them. The next slide. So before we go on, I want to ask if there are any questions in that first part.
So far, so good.
Okay. It's just like my Monday morning class, I guess. All right. So to put this together, one of the things we always talk about in online learning is that there's really 3 pillars that we try and build this on.
Tim?
Yes.
Sorry, before you move on, a question did just pop in from Damaris, and I'm sure I said that wrong, so I apologize. And his question is this for live teaching?
And the answer is, we'll get to that in just a second. I'm going to suggest a method to you that is combined, recorded, and live. So it can happen both ways. So if you hold on to that question just a little bit, a couple slides later, we'll get into the method I'm going to suggest to you. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. All right. In terms of online learning, we are, if you ever go to online learning conferences, we are constantly basing this on 3 pillars that are sort of the essence of good practice. And that's that there's 3 ways that the students need to engage. And these are natural to you in the face-to-face environment, and they become more difficult with the online environment. The first is the easy one, the student with the subject matter. They have to learn certain techniques, certain principles, certain movements. We all do that. We all understand that one. And we all know that we want to have a relationship with our students, so the student to the instructor. That does become more difficult in the online environment. You are used to sensing the mood and the feel of your class when they walk in. And you look over and you can say, oh, it's right before midterms. They all look beat. I'm going to have to adapt how I work on this to given what they're showing me. That's more difficult in the online environment. And so you have to do more check-ins with those students. You have to find ways to ask them, what is it? How's it going? Am I giving you what you need? How can I help you? You have to do that more often and more intentionally in the online environment. And then the last thing is, you don't want to forget the students with their peers. And that's the one that seems to get lost the first time people start teaching online. Because we've spent, if you're like us at our institution, we've spent half a semester building an environment in our classroom that includes our students and ourselves. And we've set up a feel to the classroom. Hopefully it has been a good one. And part of that is how the students interact with their peers. Particularly in the arts and movement arts, these are students who are used to face-to-face interaction. They want that, right? Actors and dancers want to be with each other. They're artists by their very nature. All art is a form of communication. And so we have to give them reasons and requirements to make them interact with their peers, to try and, as best we can, to continue the environment that we set up in that face-to-face environment. Next slide. Pam, are you with me? Oh, there we go. So one of the first questions you need to ask yourselves are, do I do this synchronously or asynchronously? Synchronously meaning live at the same time. The positives of online synchronous teaching are it gives immediate feedback for both students and teacher. And it also allows for answering of questions in real time, because they can raise their hand or send in a chat, much like some of you have, and I can answer them fairly immediately like I would in a classroom. It also allows me to get a sense of whether the group is with me to some extent. And so those are some real positives to teaching purely live. There are some negatives. And one is, it is absolutely impossible if you have a class of even 10 students that you can watch them all work at once. When you're standing in a classroom, you can catch something out of the corner of your eye and be drawn to it and make a correction. And in the online space, that is very difficult when each person's on a small little screen, maybe on via Zoom or whatever platform you're using. And so that becomes very, very difficult, and it takes an awful lot of time to watch each student in order. So that becomes a significant negative. It's also true that the instructor demonstrations aren't repeatable in the same way. The students can ask you to show it again, but if you're not allowing them to see it over and over again, they're working primarily off what they see and what they hear. Again, the kinesthetic field just isn't quite there. So there's some real negatives to the initial teaching of technique in a synchronous way. So if we go to the next slide, asynchronous, or not at the same time, has some positives and some negatives as well. In terms of the positives, the students can review your video of "this is what I want you to do," the technique video, at will. They can look at it multiple times. You can create yourself numerous takes until you get what you want in the video, and you can talk through all the technical aspects, albeit in a very limited time frame. And so you get a chance to really make sure you say everything you want to say, which is a real benefit for asynchronous technique teaching. We've all had that experience in class where we finish the class, we're walking out, we go, "Oh, I wanted to correct them on that," or "I forgot to tell them about this." And asynchronous allows you to address that. The negatives are, you won't be able to see your students' crucial first attempts when their mistakes are the largest and most easily corrected. And it does create an additional degree of separation between the student and instructor, because you're not working on the material. You're working on it together, but not at the same time. So next slide. Here's my best advice to all of you, is to teach asynchronously, but coach synchronously. I started doing this a number of years ago. I was a fight director for a professional production that was about 600 miles away. I'd spent about 10 days with them teaching them a fight for a Shakespeare play. And I went back to my regular teaching job, and I got a call saying we just had to replace an actor. And it was like, how in the world can I possibly reteach this? And so I started playing with this. At that time, all we had was FaceTime. So we were FaceTiming back and forth and videoing things. And so this method comes out of a lot of hard-earned mistakes. But what I can say to you is I think the best practice is to teach asynchronously and then coach synchronously. And this is what I mean. You want to create videos that are a blend of demonstration and theory, which is much like what face-to-face teaching does. We talk about this is what we want them to do. We show them what we want them to do, and we talk about why we want them to do that. That blend of demonstration and theory. So it's going to be the same in that sense. Then we're going to ask the students to practice. So for example, I might post that video on that technique on Monday morning and tell them by Wednesday night, I want them to post a video as an assessment or in a Dropbox or whatever methods you use. Post it by Wednesday night that shows them doing the technique at the slow speed. And then I will respond to them with a video of my own that will go through their video and give them corrections. And so you can use Video Note for that. There's several ways. I'm a big fan of D2L Grader on my iPad. I can watch videos and zip off a video response very quickly and efficiently. So then that's also asynchronous. But then after I give them those corrections on Wednesday, I'm going to say, okay, now we're going to set up a time for Friday. It's not going to be any more than about 15 minutes. I usually try and keep it to 10, where we're going to work synchronously over whatever platform you use for synchronous learning. I've even done, as I said, I've done it on things like FaceTime and Skype if I needed to. And so then it's just going to be me and them, and I'm going to be able to look at where they're at and give them immediate corrections. And if I need to, I can also then re-demonstrate to them very specific parts of the technique. And so and then that last video that they post, I'm also going to have several people their fellow students respond and do a peer critique so that the students are having to interact with each other. This has several things. It keeps them interacting with each other, but as we all know, one of the ways to help them with their own technique is to have them look at others' technique and critique it, because it makes them apply the theory to the actual practice on someone else. So they can find things that they need to fix by watching someone else. And then the last part is, once we get done with that whole thing, then I'm going to provide a critique, and that's where I actually will be assigning a grade, creating an assessment. So that's the process that I suggest to all of you. We're going to get a little deeper into that in just a moment, but are there any questions at this point I can answer?
There are. We have two questions here.
Great.
So from Vanessa, she was just wondering what your target age group was when you created this presentation.
I have done this technique with the youngest I've worked with were second graders, and the oldest I work with adults as well. So it's been all the way through. I've taught people to do this, particularly at the high school level, and obviously I'm a professor, so I've done it at the college level. But I will tell you, my wife, who's who works in the elementary age group, has used this same thing at her level and is using it, in fact, right now to be able to work with her students remotely.
Great. And a few more questions have popped up in here too, but I'll start with this one. How would you scale this for a larger number of students? Lindsay has upwards of 70 students in the various yoga classes they'll be teaching, and Angela has 500 students.
500 in a movement class. I, I'm still trying to wrap my head around that one. But so, so what I would probably do in classes that large is I would, um, I would have to make the assignment window longer. So rather than a 1 week working on something for 1 week, I'd probably make it for 2 weeks, because I do think you want to make sure that you do a little bit of synchronous time as much as you can. That 500 class, I don't know that you can do synchronous time, but you might be able to do synchronous time with groups of 10. Um, and so that might be one way that I might scale it, but I think it's really important, if you can, to get the synchronous time in. Um, and I would cut it down to 5 minutes. And so then my chunks or my nibbles have to get smaller and smaller. So the more students you have, the smaller you have to make the, the nibbles, I guess, is the way that I would say I would scale that.
Okay. Lots of great questions coming in here. So with the second graders, Vanessa asked, with the second graders, were their parents helping with the posting of the videos?
I think it probably depends on the second grader. My daughter, when she was in second grade, was posting videos much more effectively than I was. She has still done things to my iPhone that I don't know how to undo. So I think it probably depends. But yes, in some cases, there was in my wife's case, there's constant emails going to the parents and just saying, in some cases, it says, "Hey, your student's supposed to post a video by Wednesday at midnight. If you could help them by taking the video with your smartphone and posting it to this location." So yes, that's one way that it's been done.
Okay. And a question related to that from Kaylin is, what platform did your wife or you use? Or what platform did your wife use or do you recommend with elementary students? Oops, there we go. And was that in compliance of privacy laws and provided in a safe space for students?
So my most of my teaching is all on D2L, although I've also at other institutions worked on others. My wife's school district is using Google Classroom, and so that's where most of theirs are posted, although they just created a new video site, and off the top of my head, I can't tell you what the name of that is. But in the case of the K through 12 schools in our district, it's district mandated which ones they have to use. And there was another part to that question too.
Okay.
Did I answer them all? Sorry.
No, there's lots. There's good questions. That means you're hitting on the right things. So the other one was compliance of the other part of that question was compliance from privacy laws.
Yeah. So if you're in a private or if you've got app access within a learning management system like D2L, you should be okay on privacy laws. They're all quite compliant. If you need to go outside of that to something like Zoom, my suggestion to you is Google privacy settings on Zoom, because there's been a lot out there right now about doing that. If you do private Zoom sessions and you use passwords for those synchronous things, you're pretty darn safe. There is also a version of a Zoom license that is HIPAA compliant, which is even more stringent than FERPA. So those are all available. If you have Zoom Pro licenses, you can get the HIPAA compliant one as well for free.
Great. And a few more questions here. And Tim, if you feel like we're getting into that we're not going to have enough time to get through all your slides, you let me know and we can answer some of these offline after. But
sure.
If you're okay, we'll keep going. Is that okay?
Sure. Give me another one.
Okay. The demonstration video in health and PE, can you use professional examples or use an amateur example so beginning learners are not overwhelmed?
That's a great question. I actually suggest using an amateur video for a number of reasons. One is that you can tailor it to the types of students you have. And the second reason is most of our students who are anywhere younger than about 25 are expect most of their videos to come in the YouTube, TikTok format that are very raw. They're not edited. They don't have expensive lighting or anything like that. They're very sort of very, very casual. So I highly recommend that you make it the amateur type video.
Great. And do you think we have time for one more? And
Sure,
then
one more, and then we'll move on.
okay. Would Flipgrid be a good option for this?
I have to tell you that is not one I'm familiar with, so I'm afraid I can't answer that one. But I'll bet somebody at D2L can.
Excellent. And that's a great question to pose to Brightspace community. Does anyone have experience with Flipgrid? Terrific. Okay, why don't we move on? There's some questions in the queue here, and we'll make sure we get through the rest of your content. And if we have time at the end, then we'll come back and answer these. And if not, we'll post them to community with answers. Sound good?
Great.
Okay, let's move on to the next slide then.
All right, so here's some tips for that process I was talking about. Number one is keep it simple. You can't teach everything in 5 minutes. That will become more and more apparent as you try and do it. You'll notice that if we get to the video that we have at the end, I literally am teaching 2 movements, and that's it in about 7 minutes of video. Focus on the student technique, not the partner, except for safety issues. If you'll notice in that video again at the end, if we see it, my daughter's the person who is being my partner, and all I do is tell her the most basic of things she needs to do to keep herself safe. I'm not worried about her technique. I'm only worried about mine as the student. Again, until everyone's used to it, only 1 to 2 movements per video. You'll find that after they've done it a couple of times, then you might be able to add a little bit more. I'm sure you all know or have heard somewhere, videos in general, if they're over 5 to 7 minutes, they just tune out. My daughter's AP teacher yesterday posted a 47-minute video that he wanted them to watch, and I will tell you that my daughter said that was ridiculous. After 5 minutes, I tuned it out. And so I had to convince her to go back and rewatch it in chunks. Video the technique from multiple angles. Give yourself at least 2 angles, usually from front and side or side and back or something like that, so they get both planes of the video to see what your body is doing and nothing's hidden. And then work on your explanation of movements consistently, either top down or ground up. And this is really important, and it may be hard for many of you. It was hard for me when I first had to make this adaptation because I'm a body center person. And so I always teach about how the center moves first, and then I move out to the extremities. That does not work as well in this environment, I have found. It is best if you either start with the feet and move all the way up, or if you start with the head and move down. I'm not sure why that is. It works that way in video. I think partly because we see the extremities more clearly than we may see the movement of the center. But if you start, and you'll notice in the example video, I start with put your feet here, and then I move up to the step, and then I move up to how I turn the torso, and then finally I get to the arms. So I'm working ground up. So that's a real important tip for this process. And if you go on to the next video for me, or the next slide, sorry. Here again, more tips. Use those lower production values. Make it look like a TikTok video. Make it look like a YouTube or a Facebook Live. It engages the younger students better. I'm in my mid-50s, so most everybody is younger at this point as a student. Don't edit except to trim the clips, maybe the front and the back. Let your mistakes be there. And then point out your own mistakes, because that will help them correct. In the video you see at the end, I made a mistake, and so rather than cutting that out, I just went back and said, here's what I did wrong. Make sure you caption your videos. I think you may all know that that legally you have to caption those things. The easiest way, I think, to do it if you're on a low budget version, is to simply, send them to YouTube, let YouTube caption them, and then link to them out of whatever your classroom management system is. If it's D2L, you can just use the YouTube external learning tool. Keep your videos. One thing I know that once I made a whole bunch of these, I keep them, because who knows when I might miss class someday, or if those of you in K-12 when you might have to have a sub. And if you've got those videos, you can keep your class moving. So they become a repository. That was my great, when I started teaching online, that was my greatest illumination, was that, oh, I now have a way to cover when I can't be in class. And it was a huge boon to me, because I could go to a conference and I had a couple of videos that I knew I showed in multiple classes that were applicable. And so then I always had that ability. And last thing is, it's not about perfect video. I often have to emphasize that to artists, because we want our art to be perfect, but it's about clearly communicating with the students. So it really isn't about you doing your best work. It's about them doing their best work. Next slide. For the other visual arts out there, the same thing that I'm talking about with movement disciplines, you can do the same way, whether it's potting, whether it's painting. I just spent some time with a drawing teacher talking about this same process for him, and it's working for him at this point. Now, you may have to demonstrate alternate techniques. If not one of your students has a potting wheel, you might have to do different forms of creating pots. And don't forget that art supplies and other things are available through Amazon and other places. So you might be able to get your students the clay they need, or the drawing pencils, or whatever. And then for dancers, focus really on the parts of techniques. Don't start with saying, okay, here we're going to jeté. Talk about the individual elements of the jeté in the first video, and then build up once you're comfortable that your students are ready to put it together. So resist the urge to try and put things together too quickly, and then really hone in on the technique, because that's one of the things that you can teach well with this method is technique. It becomes more difficult to create a whole choreographed dance, although it is being done around the world, but really focus in. This is a pretty good way to teach technique. So that's just a couple examples from other arts. So we can go to the next slide. It looks like we have a few minutes here. Yeah, let's look at least the beginning of this video. I just shot this a couple weeks ago specifically for this. So.
Hello, so today we're going to cover two sword avoidances from sword cuts. They come out of a Japanese martial art tradition, but they're really easy to adapt to a staged combat situation. That's the variation I'm going to show you today. I've enlisted the help of my daughter and my wife behind the camera to help me make this little video for you. And she's never trained in any of this before, so we're going to cover a few things for her first. And the first thing is, we're going to ask her to hold the sword. She's going to take her right hand and put it all the way up to the top. Put her left hand down at the very bottom of the handle. And then for the first cut, she's going to bring it up above her head, because the first cut she's going to push with her right hand and pull with her left. So it's a cut straight down toward the head. Okay? And she's going to make her feet a little bit wider apart. There we go. And now for me, the first thing I'm going to have her cut first. Go ahead and cut. Okay? She's taking a nice step forward with that left foot on the first cut. That's the right thing to do. I'm going to make sure that I am out of distance, right? So even if she cuts early, I'm not going to get hit by the sword. So I'm going to...
Good. So if you could skip forward in that video to maybe, let's say, right in a little farther, sorry. Right in there, that'll work. Oh, that's a nice picture of me.
She preps again, I have to pull in my stomach as I move to make it look like it was closer than it was.
Okay, so that's good. And then skip to the very end because I want to show the doing it from another angle, a little farther, a little bit more, there.
Okay, so eye contact. One more time because I messed up my feet.
There's the mistake I was trying to talk about.
So the mistake I made there was on the second cut, I moved my right foot first instead of my left. So hopefully I've corrected that now. So that's it from both sides so you can see it. Those are our 2 basic cuts for today. Hello, so today
All
we're
right.
going to cover...
There we
Thank
go.
you, Pam. So that's really the material I have for you today. If we can go to the next slide, I think you'll have my contact info.
Yeah, and maybe before we do that, we do have some time here. There's still some questions.
Let's do it.
If your game, okay, great. So the first question is, I'll just work my way down from the top of the list. Hi, from Don asks, what is the name of the app you use on your iPad?
Grader. Yep.
Grader?
Grader, D2L Grader.
Okay. All right. Next question from Henrietta. When students are rehearsing the lesson for the first time, are the students watching your original teaching video at the same time as their attempt?
Hopefully they are going back and forth, watching the video, trying it, watching the video again, trying it, watching the video again, and trying it. So no, I don't have them actually moving at the same time that they're watching it at the beginning.
Okay. So I'll mark that one answered and done. Here we go. Next question. Lauren says, or asks, are these techniques meant to supplement the in-class learning? For example, how would one implement these techniques with performing ensembles like a 60 to 70 piece high school band that thrives on the group interaction beyond individual instruction?
Yeah, that is the essence of what we're all trying to figure out right now, right? So in some ways it does supplement in terms of a band. You can think of this as a sectional or an individual lesson. So one of the things you might want to do is use the video as a lesson, but then once you get to the synchronous stage, maybe you can get a section online at the same time via some video conferencing, and try as best you can to work on the sectional type of things. It's going to be difficult. When I've had to do large group pieces via this kind of thing, it slows you way down. Can it be done? Yes. Will you get the full experience that you would have in the classroom when everyone's in the same moment together? As I said at the beginning, no, you will not get fully the same experience, but you can get closer than just one student by themselves. You can really help them work on each other. If I was teaching band, for example, I might pair up 2 trumpeters, and they're supposed to get online at the same time and work on the piece together, or say a section of a piece together. So they're both working on it at the same time. So you do get some interaction between the students.
Great. Okay, not really a question. There are more questions to follow, but Lori says good information and good pace. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great. Next, we'll move on to the question from Lindsay. Would you ever incorporate technique videos produced by someone else as a resource rather than producing them all yourself to allow for more time for the personal feedback and synchronous components?
That's a great question. And my answer is I don't do that in the beginning. In the beginning, when they're just first learning technique, then I I really want to make them myself so that I can really fine tune what they're doing. Now, with more advanced students who I can feel fairly secure have basic technique and theory down, then yes, there are times when I specifically will do that to make them learn from someone else and strengthen their ability to learn in multiple ways from multiple people. But I don't start with that.
Okay. Next question here is from Jennifer, and Jennifer asks, what video software or app do you like to use?
If you're asking about recording,
I think so.
I think so, yeah. I've used a whole bunch of them. If you're on D2L and you have these, I often use VoiceThread because I like the fact that then students can actually comment and respond via video or sound right attached to the video that I've made. I've also used Panopto via D2L, but sometimes I will tell you, like that video was a pure iPhone video that we just recorded on the iPhone and then I emailed or uploaded to YouTube, and that's what we did.
Terrific. I'm going to answer that. And just a question here from, and I think that this was probably in context to something else, but it says, isn't Brightspace the app? So I think they might be looking for some information on the sort of technology ecosystem that you're using. So how does that fit in with Brightspace, and what other apps are you using?
Okay, so so for the video you just saw, as I said, we recorded it on an iPhone. I uploaded it to YouTube, and then if I were putting this in my class, then I would have used the external learning tool in Brightspace to link out to that YouTube video. But I didn't do any editing on that video at all. So like I said, I try to make this as low tech as possible at this point.
Right. Oh, and there was a question here about Pulse. I don't know if you have any experience with Pulse.
I actually do not. It's one of the things that my distance ed team and I are looking at right now, but we're kind of busy trying to get 11,000 students and 600 faculty online. So that got put on the back burner at the moment.
Yeah, and I think I know that this expands and extends way beyond just Brightspace, and when you talk about all the technologies you need to use to bring this together here. But for those of you who are on the line, within Brightspace, you have video note, you can do audio notes, there's a Bongo integration that lets you do live classes, and then also a video assessment based component that's part of that, and that's included with your system. It's really a matter of whether or not your system administrators and your institution have had a chance to turn those on. So there are some options within Brightspace for you to be able to integrate these video components in addition to the ways that Tim has explained already.
And I will say, I think I have used Video Note and Audio Note in Brightspace, and I really like those as well. I've just played around with Bongo a bit, so I've still got more work to do to learn that, but the Video Note particularly could be really helpful here.
Terrific. Okay. Any other questions? We'll just give that 1 second here. Terrific. Okay. Then I think that's a wrap for today. Tim, I'd like to thank you very much for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. I really appreciate how the education community is really coming together to share that knowledge. And if you're looking for more ways to our audience, I'll just say, if you're looking for more ways to share or to ask questions or learn for others, I strongly recommend that you engage in the Brightspace community. It's a community of users who are there to support each other. So once again, just Tim, thank you very much for your time today, and thank you to everyone who joined us.
And thank you. I hope you found it useful, and I hope you all stay well.
Great. Thank you, everyone.